Hey, folks, it's 7 o'clock, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Planning Board meeting, January 18th, 2022. My name is Kathy Barnard, and I'm the chairman. Let me start off by introducing the other members. Over on the left-hand side, Susan Replier. Sitting next to Susan is Doug Breskin, our new alternate. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you.
Peter Goodwin and Mike Hodder is the vice chairman. To my right is John Thurston. Next to John is Brad Harriman, who's the representative from the Board of Selectmen, and Julie Jacobs, another alternate. I don't think I have to appoint an alternate because we're not really going to vote on something. I mean, you know.
It's up to you. There's no formal vote tonight.
Yeah, I mean.
It's up to you if you want to appoint an alternate.
Yeah, oh, okay, all right, so alternates. I mean, you can participate in asking questions or discuss or whatever, so. Okay, all right, there are no public hearings tonight, so basically we're here to on a work session to discuss some items that we're planning on working on in 2022 and a few other items. So the first item on the agenda is the stormwater regulations. You all received a copy of it in your packet. And Tavis, I'd like to set a time when we could discuss it either at our next meeting or the following work session. I couldn't remember what we have going on at the next public hearing.
The next planning board meeting does have a public hearing for a minor subdivision, but that's the only project, so we could probably discuss it at that meeting.
Okay, all right. So anyway, this draft that you have is the result of our subcommittee, and you know, it's pretty thorough and lengthy. We've been through several meetings with the committee and spent a lot of time discussing this. Brad or John, do you have any comment you want to add? I mean, we will be talking about it at the next meeting. So, Brad, did you?
Go ahead, Brad.
No, just to say, as Kathy has said there, we've had quite a few meetings going over the drafts that we've seen here. We've seen multiple different drafts with some language changes in them. We feel as though we have a fairly good model to look at here. So, you know, also we're going to discuss it some more and then decide on the implementation, you know, to get it on the warrant and stuff like that for, I believe this goes to warrant article.
No, we just, planning board just has to have a
we can do it ourselves on our own public
right.
hearing, okay. And decide on when, you know, we want to, once we get it ready for that, to bring that forward to a vote. So, okay. That's pretty much all I really have to say on it. I think it's pretty thorough. It addresses a lot of things we've been talking about as a board for months here, even probably going on years on how to, I think the biggest thing I had on this was how to manage it after the fact for inspections, things like that. We've kind of worked through, and Tavis has come up with some good ideas on into the computer system on how it gets flagged and stuff, so that if reports don't come in, that we know it and stuff. So that was one of the larger issues that I saw with the original ordinance that we had. So that's about it for me.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, John.
Thanks to the rest of the folks who gave their time, Abby, Rich, Julie, and Roger. They did spend a lot of time with their group, and the conservation group showed up and gave some comments and their viewpoints. I do have some stuff here that I'd like to discuss. How do you want to go about it? You said we were going to have another meeting or something, or do you want me to talk about it now? Or
we're going to discuss the draft at the next meeting. We sent it to the planning board members so they would have it, and I'm hoping that they'll take a look at it.
Then I'll just give an overview.
Okay.
And really, what we focus on here is commercial, multifamily, over 10,000 square feet of disturbed area. So when we talk about that, we have to discuss the pre-development first and get a base level for the pre-development area so that all the designs can be made based on the pre-development and the requirements for the person who's doing the application. Then we come into post-development, what it's going to look like afterwards, and how the town is going to pick up after that and make sure that everything that they said they were going to do, they're going to do. One of the things with the document is I find some of the first part very informative, and then you go into pre-development and post-development after that, and then you pick up post-development again in another subheading section. I was looking at it as a document trying to figure out maybe how we could get pre-development discussion in one section and then post-development in another section. So as you read through it, you weren't picking up pre-development and post-development in different areas. And that was, as far as the document goes, I mean, there's some other small stuff that I'd like to go over with, but the other big part about this was all newly generated stormwater from development shall be treated on the development site. One of the things we've known is we have huge properties that come to us and they don't get any attention because they have more than enough square footage to not put them through the process. So I know I had talked with Tavis about a cumulative amount over the 10,000 so that we could get reoccurring projects on larger parcels that wouldn't fall under the initial 10,000. And then once they had another project, then those would kind of go together, and then they would have to start falling into line with the stormwater management plan. And so with that said, like, you know, there's a few other things that I'd like to go through, but I can do that at the meeting with us later on.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, thank you. Tavis, did you want to add anything?
The only thing I would add, and Doug actually mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting, some of the ordination of the formatting isn't correct right now. And that needs to be redone, but it needs to be redone in its entirety because all of this has to go from A and B and sub A and B to 173 in the section number. Mm-hmm. So don't get lost in those details. One of the other things, I did go through in part of making this and made sure all the links that are in there work and they go to the correct place, at least for right now. All those that refer to the DES page may change. Obviously, the DES page changed from the original draft that some of this was taken from to this draft, so none of those links worked. Something we might want to do just for ease of not having to revisit this every time a web page changes is to refer to the document and the source page, and I can go through that exercise.
I would recommend that.
Okay.
Documents like this go out of date pretty quickly when web changes are made.
Could it be either or? In other words, could you have the present one and then it may be you're going to have to go to this one? Or is that too?
Well, it
Peter-
may be, but
Peter
about the
Foley
only
might
place
get-
that changes for many of them or the only aspect of the address that remains the same is the parent organization. So it might just be we put in des.nh.gov and people can find the rest of it from there because it is specifically talking about the published guidance fact sheet. You go to DES and you can then find the fact sheet as opposed to whittling all the way down to WMB-4 PDF.
If you go just to an HDES, you're going to get lost for hours trying to find what you're looking for.
That's why I'm thinking it needs to be reworked to which fact sheet are we referring to so that people can search for that. They can be target specific. Most of the users of this document are going to know what those all say anyway. I'm anticipating. With that, I find some extra spaces here. I did go through and try and make sure all the words were separated by appropriate spaces. It's what happens when you go back and forth from Word to PDF and back again. The font changes. I don't need to have it pointed out. It'll all get done one sweeping motion at the end. I would think the easiest way to leave it for tonight is to say, please read it. Don't try and read it straight through because it won't make any sense. Try and think of a project perhaps that the board might be reviewing as you go through the document. And if anything specific comes up, email me and I'll keep a log of those questions and try and address them all in February.
Okay, great. And do you feel as if this is too cumbersome to enforce?
No, this is very easy to enforce. From a planning board standpoint and from a staff standpoint, because it calls out specifically when it's triggered and how you go through the process. And the way this draft is put together, it's already coming to the planning board. Or I'll say our regular applicants are used to addressing stormwater anyway, so it's just going to be having them adapt to these regulations. And the good peace of mind is you guys have to understand or appreciate what's happening, but you really don't have to get into the understanding the nitty-gritty of this document, because the way it's set up obligates the applicant to pay for the town to have a third-party engineer review what they turned in. They will understand this language clearly, and the planning board will get a meets, doesn't quite meet, or meets with suggested conditions coming back from an engineer, so your jobs become fairly procedural, not detail-oriented. So I find it it's going to be cumbersome to read for those that aren't used to reading it, but it's going to be very easy to implement and enforce.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, sorry, go ahead, Julie.
Could this be one of the documents that we also mention that the definitions are in the back, at the very top in the front?
We had that discussion at the committee level, and the committee recommended that these be in both. If it's going to be, because it's not really helpful to go to 175 for definitions and then flip back to the site plan regulations. So they could be added to the definitions section of the ordinance, but they should also be right with this set of regulations.
But I'm just saying even a sentence saying definitions found on page 72. Because I was reading through it and I'm like, I don't even know what that word means. But then, an hour later I find out, oh, the definitions are in the back.
We could do that.
Because I didn't go to the
so
back first.
You want them in the front?
Well,
Is
at
that
least
what
something
you-
that gives you a heads up.
Okay, all right.
That says, definitions found down page whatever.
Okay.
Then as other people that are reading this might, have a term that's like, oh, what does that really mean?
Well, the other thing we could do
That'd be
is
ticked off
perhaps
first.
bold and italics on a word that's in the definition. So at the beginning it said bold italics words are in section blank.
Yeah, as long as we know it's in the back.
Right.
Some kind of a key.
Okay.
Okay, so, go ahead, Mike.
Two questions. First off, since the board is going to be considering this at a public hearing at our next meeting,
No, not the public hearing. That's going to be a work session.
we're not going to be having a public hearing on this?
No,
We're not.
no. I mean, we're going to discuss it first and then set the public hearing.
Okay, then I'll rephrase. Since the board is going to be discussing this document at its next meeting, can I ask if the subcommittee voted to pass this document on to the board for its discussion and potential approval?
Not in so many words, but yes.
Yeah.
There was no official
Yeah.
vote to recommend, but everyone agreed it was ready to come to the board.
I wouldn't say that, Brad, Kathy, and myself never met as a subcommittee that we were appointed by the planning board to present it to the planning board. We haven't done that. Can we do that at next meeting?
Well, no, we had 2 or 3 meetings initially. Then the board asked for the subcommittee to be formed, and so that's how we proceeded. at that last meeting, I didn't get any indication from anyone that we should have another meeting.
However it's to be handled, it just seems to me that if the planning board is going to vote to adopt stormwater regulations, it would make me feel nice and comfortable knowing that the Stormwater Regulations Subcommittee decided to pass this document as it appears to us now onto this board for a vote.
Yes, they
That's how I
did.
understood the last meeting to
Yeah,
result.
right, that
yes.
was the last meeting.
Oh, that's
And
it,
they
right.
asked for Tavis to then make some corrections and send it on to the planning board.
Is that in your meeting, your minutes, meeting? your
Yes,
meeting minutes,
yes,
I'm
I'd
sorry?
be happy to get you a copy.
Just maybe make it part of the record of tonight's
Okay.
meeting so that we have all of our Ts crossed and Is dotted.
Okay,
One other question. John raised the issue of cumulative impacts on a single property over time and didn't go any further. Is that addressed in this document, and is it something that we
No, it's
we
not.
should be thinking about?
And honestly, if we're just going to send this along, I'd make the changes in front of everybody right now that I have noted down on my document.
okay, but we just agreed that we were going to discuss it at the next meeting. For the stormwater discussion, so it seems like that would be a good time to bring it up.
Okay, I thought Tavis just said it was reviewed and it was ready for the planning board. That isn't what I just heard?
No, I think what you just heard was a response to Mr. Hodder's question as to whether this document presented to us this evening is the result of the Stormwater Subcommittee, to which the general affirmative was given. What Kathy is now saying is the planning board will, because you just got this on Friday, it's not fair to assume that between Friday and today, all the board members had time to digest this, so it would be brought up for more discussion at the next planning board meeting in February,
And we'll
where it
vote.
might be appropriate to bring up more comments or changes should the board have any.
Can cumulative impacts, as John suggested, be brought up at that meeting?
Okay.
That seems to me to be something that might be important.
Okay, great,
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
okay. All right, let's see, the next item, or
Oh,
the
before-
20, sorry.
No, it's okay, if I may.
Look,
The next thing one of the things that became the substance of the last Stormwater Subcommittee with the outside commenters who are all sitting right here was a decision. So what happened is there was a draft of the regs. The regs went out for comment. Some comments came back. All parties are in the room. Those comments were incorporated into this document plus. What was included going into the last Stormwater Subcommittee meeting was everything that you see here, plus inclusion of shorefront residential properties, where 20%, so bear with me, ask questions. Right now in the shorefront residential district, lots that have 20% or greater post-construction impervious coverage require a stormwater management plan. My question to the group, the subcommittee a couple of meetings ago was, are these the regs that is intended to point to? So we added in here a section that said, not only, so it would be stormwater for any development or redevelopment which disturbs more than 10,000 square feet, also applies to subdivisions with frontage on private or public roadways, shorefront residential in excess of 20%. The group, after sending this out for comment by engineering firms and others, those comments all resulted back with single family doesn't belong at the planning board, even if it fits in the shorefront. So the collective stormwater committee decision was to remove shorefront residential.
And we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes.
And this,
Right.
and as a segue, what I did, or as a thing to talk about, and we can talk about this more in February if the board is inclined, I included in your packet this Article 6 Stormwater Management that the nearby town of, or almost nearby town of Freedom has, which addresses any site development, which is land adjacent to any first through fifth order stream. Increased amounts of water from development would leave the subject property and flow across a Class 1 to Class 5 roadway. increased amount of water from development would leave the subject lot and flow onto an abutter's property. And then similar to ours, anything that goes for site plan, subdivision, timber harvest, earth excavations under 155E, and shoreland impact permits. So this is almost an easy slip into the regulations. This would probably need to go to warrant
Yes.
at a future
right.
time as a zoning regulation. But it's something to consider, as the committee spent a lot of time, what do we do with the large, McMansions, to inappropriately coin them, going in next to the waterfront and others. So how do we address that stormwater management? So this is something to think about as a model, if you will, that could be implemented in the future. This is not vetted by the subcommittee.
Should it have been?
No, not necessarily. It could be, if that's the direction of the board.
What did you just say, Mike?
Should it have been?
Oh,
My only concern is that and that's the reason why I asked about the subcommittee vote, are we looking at a fully baked loaf of bread here, or are we looking at something which came out too soon?
in order to address the shorefront ordinance, that has to go to town meeting. And so it would be a regular warrant article. What we're trying to do here is to get something in place so that we can then address the stormwater, the shorefront regulations, and prepare something for next
My
year.
position is that the entire town-wide discussion of stormwater management is not a fully baked loaf. But in order to address what I would consider a rather gaping hole in planning board review and authority in town is stormwater management. And this is a freshly baked loaf that would address that at the planning board level. The next step would be to say, now what do we do with everything else? Because clearly there are smaller projects on private property, on private roads, et cetera, that are all contributing to
Right.
impaired waters, for lack of a better phrase. So I think
Yeah,
the
and
next step
we-
would be to go beyond planning board projects. And
Right. I mean, when we start discussing it, we may realize that we have to go beyond the shorefront residential and go into some of the other residential areas, and that's going to have a pretty major impact. So anyway, that's the.
All right, thank you.
Can I chime in to Mike's question? I've researched your question, Mike, and in front of me is a stormwater comprehensive management plan. It starts with this document that we have right in front of us, but the complete comprehensive is right here, the format's here, and the layout is right here. I've already gone through it. I'm a little concerned about the strategy that we took initially on this stormwater program. I don't think that we were clearly defined, that Stavis started with something, we started with something, and then it seems like we're chasing catnip on the end of a string a little bit. I'd like to get focused, obviously, and make it completely comprehensive so that everything falls underneath of it, and we don't have to worry about the next planner that comes in after 10 years. It's all set up already, and we can all just go from there. But
Okay, but what the stormwater regulations, I mean, that's something that we can do relatively quickly. And it's going to affect the commercial and multifamily and subdivision. So, we can do that. And then, I think we need to build on it.
Sure, I agree.
Yeah, right, okay. Okay, so next time, work session. Okay, the next item is the 2022 work program. Tavis, you did something for us here, someplace.
Well, what I did here was
Here we
take
go.
the 2021 work plan and remove those things that had been worked on, left them if they're still on there. You see number 5 still says stormwater regulations. These are all the things that we've talked about and want to make sure are included in 22. My thought was that the board could also chime in and we can add other projects if you think of things that aren't on this list. Whether that happens tonight or at the next meeting is fine.
Okay, so we have already talked about the shorefront regulations, and I know that you've had some concerns about the enforcement or reading of them, and that is where we need to start, I think, with that issue, and try to address those issues, and then decide whether we think it's working or not.
Right.
Okay?
So for example, there's the one I mentioned, greater than 20% says you need a stormwater management plan, but it's not clear in those regulations what that means. So the implementers, me and the code officer and the people submitting applications, are left to sort of self-interpret what that means. Another thing that the shorefront regulations are a little silent on, it says that all post-construction impervious, 15 to 20%, greater than 20%, et cetera, but it does not account for those projects that come in at 30% and go down to 21%. Do they still need a stormwater management plan because they're in excess of 20? Do they get credit for coming down from 30? How much? What's it mean? Those are some things that we need to work on.
Okay.
Not to discuss it now. There's a
Yeah.
couple of big areas of, huh?
Right. Okay, and then the next issue is sort of what we're calling the housing update, and that's the multifamily, inclusionary zoning, and workforce and elderly.
And affordable, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so what it seems to me that we should have one section in our ordinance that deals with all of this.
Yes.
You know, rather than chasing around. And so that, I think, should probably be our goal, is to try and bring them all together.
Yeah, I agree. We have three, I think, regs currently, 3 different dates, none of them contemporaneous, and all of them, in some cases, contradictory, and altogether difficult. I think I've always said that when we've discussed housing updating of the regulations, that we should roll them all into one, all-inclusionary regulation covering all 3 or 4 bases here. And that would be a good exercise to do, but hopefully by the end of the next coming session, we can get something onto the warrant for 2023. I would
Right.
address all 4 and touch density, which I didn't want to say that word, but it's out now.
More on that in a moment.
Yes.
Right, but, yeah, they are contradictory, and that's very frustrating for people trying to work with our regulations, so. Okay, the remove newspaper notice requirement from site plan and subdivision regulations.
Yeah, the legislature has modified the statute to no longer require printing in a newspaper of general circulation from site plan and subdivision regulations. In your packet, I did put in that little section. It talks about section 173.10 and 175.168, which are for the general crowd, site plan review and personal wireless service facilities. So if you go to the online code and type in the word newspaper, there's about 27 references or so in town. 2 of them fall into areas under the purview of the planning board, and these are they. So the question for the board to consider is, following last year's amendment of the rules of procedure to no longer require public notices being published in Granite State News, does the planning board want to amend the site plan regulations and/or wireless service facilities to no longer require notice in the paper? Now, I want to be clear, the board can still put something in the paper if you want. If there's a project coming up and you'd like to tell the world about it, there's nothing preventing you from putting it in the paper. This is specifically speaking to whether or not it is in the paper for the purposes of public notice under statute, which we can accomplish by putting on the bulletin board in 2 places and posting it online.
Right, right, and I did receive an email from Suzanne Ryan and passed it on to all of you, so you've got her thoughts on this change, but
Yes, the zoning board is still very interested in not only publishing the notice in the paper, which they have to do, but also posting the notice of decision in the paper.
right, and the other thing that I passed on to you was the application, the times, starts out at 2016 and shows you how much we have spent on this matter, so that will be useful information, I think.
The short answer is the planning board has been over budget from its legal notice line for 4 out of the last 5 years.
Doesn't the applicant end up reimbursing, paying all those costs?
No. For a site plan and subdivision, it starts out with a $50 fee for notice, and then they pay for the abutters. So we could increase the fee in the application form if the selectmen would so allocate, and then they would be passing on the true cost. The real question is it worth having anyone put money into putting it in the paper when such isn't required by law? It's a town preference, if you will. So if the board decided, no, we want to keep putting it in the paper, that's fine. We can go through the process of meeting with the selectmen to update the fees. I don't think the fees have been updated anywhere near as regularly as the paper increases the cost of printing. For those that saw the last public hearing notice for the planning board in the paper, I received a number of calls that it was too small, it was illegible, can't we afford a bigger notice? And the short answer is it's the smallest notice we can print in the paper at $69. Keep in mind, the applicant is paying $50 at this point.
Do you have a copy of Terry's spreadsheet that she sent around?
Yeah, I emailed it.
Yeah, I did not bring it tonight.
Oh, okay.
Well, I looked at it really,
Here it is.
I looked at it
Why
really briefly.
is $69 the smallest one that we can get?
That's what they have a picture online that shows this is how big a box you get for X price. The smallest box is $69.
Oh,
Yeah.
Didn't Terry's spreadsheet show that application fees more than offset costs of advertising for public notices from the planning board for the last several years? I was surprised to see that we weren't actually losing money on this deal.
We're losing money on the advertising line. We're not losing money overall.
Okay, then if we're not losing money overall, my suggestion on this motion or suggestion to the board is we should change site plan review and the wireless facilities to remove the requirement to advertise in the paper, but we should not discontinue advertising in the paper because there are, as Suzanne points out in her email, which we've all seen, a number of people who actually follow the newspaper and get their notices of notice in the newspaper. I do. Even though I'm on the board, I like to see it in the newspaper too, and there are people who don't have computer capabilities or even computers at home and who can't see it on their phones. So I would suggest take the requirement out so that we now have flexibility to do whatever we want in the future. Remember that the Granite State News right now is a paper of around 6 pages. When I first came up here, it was that wide, literally. I just burned a 1984 copy in my grate yesterday. Who knows what it's going to be like in a few more years. So let's get the flexibility to do whatever we need to do under changing circumstances, change the regulations, but continue on the way we've been going. My suggestion.
So I'd like to ask if we should raise the 50 to 100 now, and so we can plan for the future.
You can't. You can make that recommendation, and I can use that recommendation to meet with the selectmen.
I would make that a motion if somebody would want to second it. discussion.
I'll second it for discussion if that's a real motion.
Oh, okay, well, just a second, I have to appoint an alternate. Julie, would you be willing to be the alternate in Vaughn's place?
Okay, so he's made his motion, I'll second the motion for discussion purposes, but we're not losing money right now. Why do we want to raise fees on the public if we don't need to? We can always do that
Well, he said it was.
at the future.
He said it was right there at the edge. We're not losing money yet, but, I mean, maybe we raise it to 75. I mean, it's going to, how do we know what the papers are going to cost us next year or the year after? I mean, are we going to revisit?
Well, it's
Yeah,
just like,
Just revisit it.
there's no reason. I mean, we get an update from CN Brown on what the price of diesel is going to be next year. We get a price on the heating system. There's no reason we can't contact the paper prior to budget time and see what the line is going to be.
You would just go to the select
I'm
board
not
with our
gonna
hat
say
in hand
it's-
saying, please, we need more money. Would you approve a rate increase?
It's not terribly, I mean, it's not really that clean cut because we still have to fight the 5-year average battle with the budget committee. But I think the evidence is right in front of them. We're consistently over, we're looking at bringing it to this. We're not passing that on to the taxpayers, but we need to have our expenditure line up because we anticipate this expense. Yes, we're raising the fees. We're working with the selectmen to make sure the fees follow the price. So, and it's not to say, when I say we're not losing money in the cumulative, is because if you have 3 public hearings, that notice isn't much larger than if there's only one item. If there's one item and you're receiving $50 and paying $69, that's a problem. If you have 3 public hearings on an evening, it works out. Because 3 people, now we have $150 and we're paying $69 for an ad. So that's how it works on the aggregate, but individually it does not.
You want a motion, Madam Chairwoman?
Okay, well, a motion has been made and seconded.
This is John's motion now.
John's motion, and John, your motion is,
Can you repeat the motion, please?
yeah,
My motion is to increase the cost from 50 to 75 or $100.
52. Okay. Okay, so that's the motion from John. Mike has seconded it, and all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'm opposed.
No.
I abstain.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. And you're
Abstain.
abstaining, okay.
So yeses again, hands, please. 2.
Yes on the
Noes?
motion. Noes.
Yeah,
2 to 2.
Abstain,
abstain.
2, 3.
The
Okay,
abstains
so
have it.
nothing happened.
Nothing
So what I heard with that is that we're going to take a holistic overview of the fees for site plan and subdivision, and I will make a recommendation to the board at a later date, and then subsequently go to the selectmen
Based on
as
some.
may be required.
Based on some realistic requirements, as opposed to it's just too cheap.
In the meantime, I can put the language together. See, site plan we can change at the planning board level. I don't know if we can change personal wireless facilities. And
That
frankly,
requires a-
Yeah,
I would anticipate, my recommendation, for what it's worth, might be to leave it in personal wireless facilities.
Fine, because that way, that's a
Well,
big, could become a big issue.
yes.
All right, fine, let's leave that one, and it doesn't have any.
And there
doesn't
are
pertain
enough
elsewhere.
other, what I call, there are shock clauses that come into play with personal wireless services, so having the paper is one of the tools.
Then I'll be happy to make a motion that the planning board remove the language in 17310 1B, quote, "and in a newspaper of general circulation in the town, period, close quote."
but wait a minute. Is this really the first public hearing on this,
We don't
for the
need,
rules of procedure?
it's a site plan review.
This is the first read. We'll bring it back in February, and Mike can make the motion again, and we can set a public hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're supposed to do that for the rules of procedure. Isn't that what you're talking
We're talking about site plan review?
about? Okay.
So we're amending site plan review, which I thought we could simply do.
Oh, okay, all right.
You need to have a hearing.
And then put it on the
Kathy's
next, put it
wondering
on the
how many-
agenda for the
Yeah,
next
right.
time, and then I will make
Yeah.
that motion. Thank you, Tavis.
Yeah, okay.
The reason why I abstained was that the 75 to 100 seems sort of nebulous. And I think it's something we should look at realistically and see what's really needed rather than we need something specific.
Okay, to be revisited, right?
Julie's got a,
Let's.
Go ahead, Julie.
I personally, in those little notices, like to see what the verdict was from the weeks before. I don't seem to remember seeing that as much in the planning board stuff as I do like in the zoning board. Is that true, or do I just
Rumor
miss it?
is that the zoning board used to do it. I have never seen it, and when I got here, I was never told that that's the way things worked. I have never seen it from the planning board. I also have had very few people ever ask what the outcome was. Usually if people are interested, they attend the hearing of either board and find out what happened. The people that are very interested are typically the applicant when it doesn't go their way, and then they need the copy within the 3 days per statute so they can begin their 30-day appeal clock.
Yes, they need to know like right away. They can't
So,
wait for the paper to come out.
Going back to the ZBA just for a second, they said, well, we want to put the notice of decision in the paper also. So I took their advertising budget and doubled it for the purposes of going to the budget committee. The budget committee said no. They invited the zoning board in to justify the increase. Nobody from the ZBA showed up, so the budget committee put it back to where it was. There's two things going on there. One, the budget committee was making the decision that the town shouldn't be paying funds that aren't required to be paid. But at the same time, I now have a budget line that doesn't let me expend more than what's in there without getting justification from the town manager and the finance office, et cetera. So there's compounding isms.
Can I?
So, back to the planning board, I'm happy to do a more holistic review of the expenses incurred in being a planning board and coming up with a way to resolve those conflicts.
Is there any way for us to find out what percentage of the Wolfeboro population actually gets the Granite State, if that's where we're doing this?
I can't even tell you the percentage of people that have a dog license, but I could try.
Anyway, it may not be possible to get, but the idea is that, is this an efficient way to get information out to the people? Or is it better to have it online and have it that route? I really don't know.
Well, two different boards have talked about this at two different occasions, and the only people that seem to have strong commitment to it are either those I do not hear from ever, or the board members that want things a certain way because it's always been that way or it's what they expect to see. I have never had people come rushing in saying, what do you mean the planning board approved this? I saw nothing in the paper.
Right.
So it's a hard thing to reach.
Change is hard.
Okay, to be revisited, right.
But for nothing else, the fact that the state removed it from the statutory requirement suggests that someone did some investigation in the paper is not efficient.
Well, and you might end up then saying what percentage of the people who get the Granite State actually read those notices anyway. And I think there are
Well,
many
Mike
times.
and I do.
Okay, we
I
could.
do.
Well, if you,
And I do.
But if you think about it though, Peter, if you think about the average attendance at a planning board meeting, it's typically people that receive the abutters notice because they stand up and say, I'm an abutter. Now, that's something the applicant pays in entirety. That $5.15, whatever it is paid by the applicant and the abutters show up. Or, as we saw relatively recently, if somebody puts something on Facebook, the town shows up. So the same thing when, a notice went in the paper, and I should have done a straw poll. How many people are here because of Facebook? How many people read the notice in the paper?
We'll look at the Survey Monkey results. When
Right.
we did the drive-through restaurants, hundreds online,
Yeah.
many people showed up, which is a remarkable turnout, but
Right.
nonetheless. But there is something to be said, and I'll make the case now, for tradition and doing things the way we've always done them. It's not costing an arm and a leg. Some people, the older ones among us, expect to see it in the newspapers.
No,
Let's keep it going until those of us who expect to see it in the newspapers aren't around to look in the newspapers anymore, and then change it.
and I think one of the other drivers behind the legislative change is that when you have weeks like this week, for example, when do you need to get it to the paper when Monday's a holiday and Friday's a half day or weather is horrible? More than once, not necessarily in Wolfeboro, but in my time in New Hampshire, there have been days that I should not have been driving but needed to get to work for the purpose of getting the notice to the paper so that no one could show up at a hearing.
Life is tough.
I'm just, I don't mind, it takes about 20 seconds to put a notice together and get it to the paper, and something shows up and the world continues to spin. Again, I agree with the general discussion tonight that perhaps it could come out as a requirement, but that we continue to do it anyway. So,
A question.
Yep, go ahead.
Has there ever been a discussion to put it on the town's website?
they're on the website.
They're on the website.
Yeah.
Well, it's not easily to find.
Not easy to find, and not
No, I've
always
gone
there.
around and around and tried
So
to navigate.
what I would recommend you do is go to the planning board page on the website and up under subscription, subscribe, because every time I post an agenda online, I hit e-subscriber and everyone that's subscribed gets a blast.
I have never once gotten one. I get them from the ZBA, from the
Yeah.
Budget Committee, from the police.
I will make sure that
I didn't know
I'm not
I
always the
subscribe.
one to do it. So I will make sure that when we put it up,
That would
we
be
hit
good.
How
subscribe.
many of us know to subscribe?
What's that?
How many of us know to subscribe on each individual page?
I have.
Well, you can go to the
I did like the
subscription
police
page.
thing.
Doesn't
You
always
can go
work.
to the subscription page and say, I want to know about Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, Zoning Board, Conservation. It's just a whole list, and you check the box.
Yeah, I get
One
them
of the-
all except the planning board.
I don't feel so bad.
But I was talking about the announcements page. When you go to the Wolfeboro page, you would think it would be on the announcements page.
We can look into that. No, that's never been done.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's like, that's the first thing that everybody goes to, is the announcements page. So they're not going to go digging around. We've already heard comment from the public that it's hard to navigate. So that'd be great if you could do that.
Okay,
I have a feeling, though, if we start putting all of the board meeting on the announcements, all of the announcements are going to get buried. So you're going to have to start digging for if the dump is open or closed, or dig for the date of fireworks if all the meetings start going on.
Could be a click link.
Isn't it listed on the town calendar? Aren't our meetings listed on the town calendar?
Yes,
With a
yeah.
link to the agenda?
Yes.
Well, then-
If we want a brief verbal tutorial, when you go onto say you go onto the planning board page and you log in and you say add meeting agenda, you say planning board meeting, you put on the date of the meeting, you upload the agenda, it says related event. If you click the related event line and put in planning board, it'll say 2/18/22/1900. That way, everything goes up. So the planning board page will say meeting agenda over here, it'll have minutes down below it, and then if you go to the calendar and you click on the link, it'll bring up the same agenda. But I will tell you, if you ask 5 different employees within this building how to post an agenda, you may get 6 different answers. Which is,
That's the way it should work.
that's, yes.
okay,
And we will endeavor to make sure that those that subscribe to the planning board get the planning board push email.
okay. The accessory building, I think we all sort of said we should look at it again.
Yep.
So that's why it's on here. And also the fact that we need a definition for half bath. That
Yes,
seemed
and
to be something that.
The quick discussion on that, Madam Chair, is I would recommend we stop using the phrase half bath altogether and simply say toilet and sink, if that's what we really mean.
Right.
But I will bring that back to the February work session for an extended discussion.
Okay. All right, stormwater regulations and roads.
I think we'll address that when we touch on the regs
Right.
next time.
Okay. Impact fees.
So as the board may remember, there was a two-part contract a couple of years ago to have Bruce Mayberry look at impact fees and come up with some solutions. That he completed part one of that contract and was reimbursed for that. Planners changed, monies weren't encumbered, so the $7,500 for phase two never occurred. I went to the budget committee this year and asked for the $7,500. They asked why it wasn't being done in-house and cut the number down so we don't have the $7,500. So I reached out, and then Mayberry retired. I asked Bruce Mayberry for some recommendations, and I got the name of Stu Arnett, who works for the ADG group. He does impact fees, TIF districts, how to do the fancy financing to make innovative planning occur. I do have a contract from him. At this point, the price tag is at $8,000. He is willing to pick up where Mayberry left off and then perhaps take a couple of steps back, get the planning board on the page and move forward. But again, the planning board only has $4,000 should the budget be adopted at town meeting. The town manager has signed that contract. I have not brought it to the board. There's a reason. Town manager signed the contract because I said, well, if we get the contract in time, I can encumber $4,000 from 22 and the $4,000 from 21, and I'll have 4,000 more coming in, and neater, I'm ahead of the $7,500. I was then not allowed to encumber the $4,000, but promised that the town would find the balance of the $8,000 to move forward. At this point, I have not reached back out to ADG, and I will bring it back. I will bring it back at the February meeting so the board can review what that contract language looks like. And if we're interested, I can invite Stu up for his preliminary discussion with the board at a future work session.
So you do have the other $4,000?
No, we don't.
I don't.
You don't?
But I was generally promised that we would find a way to make it work because the town desperately needs to update the impact fees.
Okay.
So if we stop paying for all these notices, we're going to free up some money. But
Not enough.
if we don't contact legal counsel, if we don't do a lot of things, the $4,000, as much as it sounds, is not terribly hard to find at the end of the year.
Well, it seems to have been pretty hard to find for the ZBA to get their notice of
Well,
approvals published.
the line I'll draw, and this would be more in the sand for some and concrete for others. The reason they had issues getting their additional money is because they couldn't justify what the additional expense was for. The budget committee looked at that additional expense as something that we're not required to do anyway, so why are we going to double down on it?
At the risk of being injudicious, is the town manager and the Board of Selectmen aware of the importance of updating our impact fee structure?
I believe, but I think it would be helpful if someone were to come in and have a meeting with the planning board and perhaps help the planning board in putting a memo forward to the selectmen to do
Who's that person going to be?
Stu Arnett.
You want the individual who's going to benefit from the contract to come in here and tell us?
No, he is the contractor.
He is the contractor. We're the one we're going to be contracting with him, correct? You want him to come in here and give us pointers as to how to craft a memo to those who have the purse strings to release money to fund this guy? That's
Yes.
not, that doesn't work for me.
Okay, I guess you're hearing it the wrong way.
Okay.
What I think, instead of the planning board trying to figure out how what we have is broken, I think people could help point out how other places do it.
At the risk of, well, I'm not going to continue this kind. I think it's obvious why it's broken. I don't think there's any member on this board who's not aware of why and how the impact fee structure is broken and wouldn't come up with a couple of suggestions as to how to make it better, all of which would redound to the financial benefit of the town.
Right.
I don't think I would look very carefully at a memo drafted by somebody who was in the business
would
of making
financially
the money.
benefit from the-
Exactly.
all right.
Thank you. But I wouldn't, I mean, we are quite capable of making a presentation to the Board of Selectmen and to the town manager on why these changes need to be done and why it's going to cost us $4K in addition to what we have in our kitty to make that happen. I mean, 4,000, what was our total, what have we paid so far to the school?
A lot more than that.
Yeah, 800K. And to quibble over 4,000 makes no sense whatsoever.
But Tavis, didn't you just say that the select board was be able to find that money because they think it's important to change?
Yes, I don't know if it's the selectman that would find it, but yes.
But the town manager was suggesting that. So therefore, I think there's ample opportunity to have it work.
And the contract's been signed. He can start.
We can't pay the full contract price. We should not suggest that he can start. We ran into the problem with Maybury. We paid half of Maybury, and then we ran out of money, and he went away. We don't want to get the reputation of only paying half a contract, and this is a fairly small industry as well. If I were going to have Brookside come in and do some plumbing work, I wouldn't say, I'll pay you half and I'll see if I can get the other half maybe later sometime, please. They're not going to show up. And I would feel diffident about doing it, so that's my suggestion.
Well, maybe the first memo that needs to be drafted is, here's a copy of the contract that's come in. You know, we need some assurances before we engage in any further work. We need to know where this money's coming from.
I think we should simply make our case to those who have the purse strings, why this is an important project, and then it's on them. You know, then it's on them.
Do you want me to draft a memo for the board to consider along with the contract to come back at the next meeting?
Yes.
What do you think?
Okay.
Good.
Okay. So that's where we are with impact fees. Okay, master plan priorities. First of all, there are a couple things that probably need to be added, not to the master plan, but to the work session. We've really got to talk about removing the C2 district. That's after the town vote, to make sure that, you know, the items that we were going to move into Pine Hill get passed. So anyway, that thought all of a sudden came to me. But as far as the master plan is
Well,
concerned,
for peace of mind in the interim, the only piece of property that is zoned by virtue of a version of a meets and bounds description in the unofficial zoning map. And I believe it's town-owned, and currently there are no uses
Yeah.
allowed in it.
right, no,
So
I know, but
it's
we
a
just
safe
had.
thing to have, but yes, it should go away.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just one of those things that, okay, all right. As far as the master plan is concerned, we've got some high items here that we really have to deal with. The first one is the existing conservation subdivision. Tavis, you've given us something, so we really, I don't know, do people think that's important or not? I mean, we haven't seen a subdivision, let alone a conservation subdivision, in a while. So I'm not sure that may be a high priority.
I would suggest that that one can be done reasonably quickly, and the reason is that the fact that it hasn't been used recently ends up being one point. The other thing, or one other point, is that apparently that is not something which any developer is really interested in using, which therefore means that it may be outdated. And the other thing is that I would suggest that the developments which were done under those regulations, where there's conservation properties, Conservation Commission is responsible for dealing with them. But most of these little protected areas are small, and they are also generally in wetland, which therefore means that in some ways that regulation is, or that idea is outdated because you can't do anything in the wetland anyway. So I think that it's something that we could just sort of get rid of without a whole lot of ado. I would also suggest that the Conservation Commission does not want to have to deal with, 36 little pieces of property in a development of 100 acres and say, oh yeah, we got to check on those every year. And so I think it's something we could get rid of very easily, and
Okay,
so
well,
let's put it on.
Okay, well, we
schedule.
do have an ordinance that's been drafted, so all we have to do is
Well, I guess
discuss it.
my question on that is why aren't all subdivisions at this point being obligated to be conservation subdivisions? Don't think about the existing conservation subdivision regulations that are unwieldy and outdated. But if somebody's coming in and they have 100 acres and they plan on putting in 35 two-acre lots, why are we not encouraging them or permitting them to put 35 houses on a smaller portion and put the rest in open space? It doesn't have to be a conservation easement. I mean, that's only one of the objects. So if a developer wants, I think we should be encouraging the reduction of the sprawl mentality. Not that Wolfeboro really has sprawl, but you see where I'm going.
Well, we did try to put in some incentives in the one that's in place now.
Correct.
So, yeah.
So I don't think it's very difficult to do, but I don't want to put any work into it if the board just assume kick it.
Okay, how do the rest of you feel?
So, if I'm not mistaken, weren't we in the room downstairs and you did it on the whiteboard and you came up with a conclusion that the conservation subdivision was being canceled out by the basic setbacks from the properties and therefore...
Well, the table I showed the board is you net more open space with a traditional subdivision than you do under the conservation regulations. So if the intent of conservation was to get more open space, it doesn't.
I would second Peter's suggestion. Let's move this down to the bottom of the list,
Okay.
and let's not discuss it tonight.
Okay, but it is considered a high priority, so
Well, we're
does
just,
it go on the list, or?
yeah, at the
okay.
bottom.
Yeah, all right, okay,
That's what to agree with.
all right.
Since we've only had, we've never had one proposed, or we've had one?
I've had 3 different phone calls in my, 14 months now, and people read through those regulations and they decide they don't want to develop,
Okay.
which might be exactly what we want it to do, is discourage people, but
Well,
it's not doing what it was intended to do.
Let's put it on the bottom of the list.
okay, all right. The next one is, another high priority is develop a water resources master plan chapter. That was,
I think that one we ended up finding, when we looked at the water resources, we found that it was included in other parts.
okay,
And so I think we decided that we didn't need to worry about it.
okay.
I would chime in and say that the book that I presented earlier on tonight has that incorporated into it, a water resources plan. And basically, we could touch base on that when we review our document later on.
But I think that when we looked at the master plan, I ended up, I believe, looking at whether we needed to have another chapter written. And when I looked at it, I think I volunteered to write it, but I looked at it and found that everything that we were going to write into it was already in the master plan. It was in 2 sections. It was in natural resources and
Future land use?
future land use.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it's like, we don't need to have one because it's already there. And so.
Look at that, high priority checked off.
Okay.
Madam Chairwoman, are we going to go through all of the master plan priorities tonight, or are we just looking at the work plan, of which master plan
well,
priorities is one part?
I've got to fill out this thing for the master plan committee, and I didn't want to do it without going through and making sure that we were all on the same page.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, we are talking about the,
At the same time, the report to the master plan committee is basically a report on what has been done, and it really is, I believe, something which does not need full board approval because we sort of know what we've done, and
okay,
and
but
that's
I'm
all
a
it is.
very inclusive person here. I think that it does. But anyway, I mean, there are a lot of them. Mike is right, but I just wanted to make sure that we have dealt with all of the things that we need to deal with, and I think some of them we have. I mean, one of them is looking at the affordable housing regulations. We've already got that taken care of. Implementing stormwater management requirements, that's already in progress. Developing shorefront permits, I think we're going to be dealing with that. Let's see.
Kathy, that's the same spreadsheet. If you go to the master plan page and click on the planning board priorities, is that the spreadsheet?
Yes.
So maybe what we could do, I mean, I don't have an issue if you want to go through them tonight, but I think it would be helpful if the board went to if you don't want to do it tonight, an option to throw out is that the board members can go to the master plan page, click on the planning board priorities, go through the spreadsheet online. That's the same thing that Kathy has in front of her. And if something jumps out that you don't believe the board is addressing, we come back at the next meeting and say, I noticed this one and this one that we haven't talked about. What do we want to do with those? And that would allow Kathy to fill out her form.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, there are a couple, if we're going to be developing our work program, is we talk about density in a couple of different places. So, you know, I mean, I'm not sure. In conversations with Dave Ford, he has said you really wait until we see what the new report is going to say. That'll probably be out in June.
I haven't heard anything that soon about
Yeah,
that.
can we discuss that on
Yes.
the agenda?
Yep, we can. I'm
As
just
it's
trying
an
to tell
agenda
you
issue.
that it was one of our priorities, and now we're having to drop it down.
Yeah, there's a Spaniard in the
okay.
works there.
All right, okay, so, I mean, there's another one, look at congregate living. We've already approved something there, so I think we've dealt with some of these things. So if you want to take a look at this, how are we going to do this?
I think that the easiest way would be for you to just forward that spreadsheet to the
okay.
members of the
Okay.
committee or the board, and
All right.
they can see what it is. And if you have ended up saying that this was only just talked about instead of
Right.
somebody thinks it's in progress, well, we can make that change.
Okay,
This is a report, it's not a, gospel, and the reports that I've gotten back so far from 4 of the departments or areas, they're just giving their best idea of to what's going on. And
okay.
The
well,
people are responding.
there are 4 so far.
Okay.
I think it's out of,
Yeah, just to set everybody's mind at ease, we've already done quite a few.
you might be happy to know that the CIP report came in first. He did it.
What's the IP?
Because we are not a decision maker.
It's just what you've done, so it's like,
So
yes, I did.
to Mike's question, when you go to the master plan page on the website, each of the groups that had a chapter or topic area in the master plan identified their priorities. So Peter broke down each of those by every time a task points to that committee or subcommittee, conservation, me, CIP, planning board, et cetera. And there's a spreadsheet under each of those titles on what the master plan says they're to be working on. And then it was, done, in progress, not started are the categories. So it's just asking people to say, where is this on your radar screen?
Can I ask a question? The CIP was tasked with something on the master plan, that the capital
Yes.
improvements program?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Which
couldn't
doesn't exist.
figure.
CIP doesn't exist except as a number of members who have subsequently disbanded, has no authority to begin with, and is only an advisory body?
All I am doing with what I have done.
I'm only
is-
interested in finding
Yeah.
out. This is
Well,
news to me.
the issue is that the master plan specifically tasked the CIP group to do X, Y, Z.
But there is no CIP group until it's constituted by the planning board at some time in the month of June.
Well, those people have done a number of things, and the report came back, and, this is what we've done, and basically they're doing what the master plan wanted, so.
So
Right.
if you recall the master plan, there's a section that says implementation items, and at the end of each task, if you will, it might say town manager, board
Yeah,
of selectmen,
understood.
planning, CIP is listed.
Understood.
So
No,
all
I'm
Peter did was pull out,
My understanding that CIP is listed. How is CIP supposed to fulfill its
You go-
past requirement?
I
You go
I
and talk
wasn't
to the
here for the
chair and see
writing
if they've
or
done
the-
it.
Yeah.
But there is no chair of the CIP because there is no CIP. It disbanded when it was done.
Okay, I just
Well,
related
by
to
the
what
same
we did
token, I'll
last
Delete
time.
the form.
I had a very lengthy one for myself, and I frankly put everything as in progress because it touched,
Right.
this one talked to that one, which talked to that one, which touched on planning board things, et
Yeah.
cetera.
And it may end up being that there's a particular issue which the Board of Selectmen were supposed to be dealing with, or at least they're mentioned, but in fact, it is really an electric department issue, and it's being dealt with over there. Well, Board of Selectmen don't know what's going on, but that's fine, but it'll show up in the electric department. So it's, we're just looking, these were people who were tasked, and ultimately, if the electric department does something, probably the Board of Selectmen has to act on it. So but it's not to you yet, and so, you say, hey, no, I haven't done anything with this.
A very similar one, Mike, is the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce said, you can't make us come up with priorities. We're happy to help you with these things.
Right.
The Chamber of Commerce exists. The CIP committee
Well-
does not.
Yes, but the town doesn't
Okay, you've
control
made
the
that
Chamber
point
of
several
Commerce. The
times.
planning
Yeah, I
board,
understand, Kathy, I made it several points, and maybe I'm being a silly stickler for precision here, but how can you task a committee that doesn't exist with a task that it has no authority over, even if it did
All
exist?
I did was.
I would suggest that some
was
members
look
of the
at what
master
we
plan.
did this past year.
Some members of the master plan committee didn't know all the ins and outs of things, and some of the recommendations were, I would say, patently false, and that shouldn't exist because it's never going to happen. And others, the recommendations were, oh, we knew that had happened already, so therefore don't worry about it. As in, the Natural Resources Committee ended up saying that we should deal with milfoil. So we sent that out to the Board of Selectmen, and they could check that off immediately. Yep, we're working on that one. So it's.
Sorry I brought it up.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see, conservation subdivision, we've already dealt with that. The next item is housing on School Street and Laner Street.
this was on the
Tied to
20,
the
this was
charrette.
on the 2021 work plan. I just carried it over because we haven't had the discussion. Another way of rephrasing number 9, by the way, numbers 1 through 10 are not ordinal, they're just numbered for a number of topics. 9 is really the density question and all that comes with it. I think the reason that it went on the 21 work plan was to say, well, let's see what the charrette comes up with, because we knew that was going to be on Laner Street, and let's see what the recommendations are. The board has already jumped a bit further than that and wondered generally about density. So,
Okay, and we will be getting the plan for the charrette.
yes, it's just a
And
report.
I'll
yes.
pass that on to everybody, so that then, if something comes up, we can
Yep.
deal with it. Okay, and then CIP is on,
I was asked to add it on the 21 plan. It's just one of the placeholders on the work plan. So.
All right, well, then I'll chime in, because I was thinking about that as I saw this work plan. CIP is a subcommittee of the planning board. It has advisory capacity for the Board of Selectmen and for the Budget Committee. The Board of Selectmen usually my experience, have presented to the CIP committee members and department heads every year a statement of their expectations and their requirements for the CIP and for departmental increases. Priorities, basically. But the planning board never has. In the years I've been on the CIP committee, the planning board has never said, this is what we would like to see, which seems to me kind of odd because it's our committee. And we're supposed to be making recommendations to the powers that be in the town. We've never, as a board, made recommendations to the powers that are in the town. We've worked through the CIP committee, in my experience, Kathy and I, trying to translate what we believe to be important that we've heard from the board into CIP recommendations, but almost 95, 97% of the recommendations coming to CIP are coming from departmental heads. So they refer principally to some long-term 10-year projects or also some short-term projects. Planning board has never chimed in with what we think is an important long-term project. For example, community/senior center. We feel that's an important issue. Part of the planning for the town, in my opinion, would add an integral part to the town that would be attractive for future growth, bring more people in, and provide a service that is not currently provided, but a service that is provided in Ossipee and Alton, are the two nearest towns to us. It doesn't make a great deal of sense. So I would like to propose that the planning board think about, hold a discussion, work session, shouldn't take long, on what we think the town should be looking at in the next 10-year plan, the CIP program, and come up with a recommendation, a suggestion that would engage the departments in the town, working maybe synergistically, or maybe a task for a specific department, and with bringing the selectmen in as well, as an addition to the town CIP program that has not up until now been made.
It's conceivable that the master plan implementation subcommittee would be able to evaluate which things have or have not been started, addressed, completed, et cetera. And perhaps when the CIP is formed in '22, projects that identify the following, whatever those priorities are of the planning board, I don't want to say get a certain weighting.
Well, I wouldn't say that, no, because that's not the way the process would work.
But it could.
The master plan itself, well, yes, practically. The master plan itself would be a wonderful place from which to pick projects that the planning board could recommend, because there we have the will of the town behind us, the master plan itself, and the impetus and the important the recommendation of the planning board.
One of the things I'm working on is the cover sheet for each of the projects that comes in. This was my first year watching CIP in Wolfeboro, and there was very little attention paid specifically to where from the master plan do you find the foundation for this project.
Yep.
In some cases, I'm not picking on anyone, very sorry, but if it just said the energy chapter supports this, or the natural resources chapter supports this, to me means less than implementation goal 2.3.6. That's a clearly discrete thing that the planning board voted on with the master plan that should, in my opinion, have weight over a more generalized reference to the master plan.
The way the authorizing statutory language writes suggests that more is needed than simply a reference to what would be a good thing for the town, see the master plan as a justification for master plan authorization for a particular departmental project.
Except I would suggest, though, that I don't believe there was anything, and I may not be reading it, but I don't think there was anything in the master plan which said maintain our fire department, which therefore means it would be hard for the fire department to justify a new purchase based on the master plan. So I agree with your statement that
directly,
when
yes,
it is,
but if the fire department can justify that they need a new piece of equipment because they need to have a a shorter response time for the growth in the rural areas of town further from the center of town or areas not provided by services.
But all I'm saying is that it may be hard in some particular cases to actually quote the line in that master plan.
Correct.
So therefore, at the same time, it may be that we should encourage them to quote the lines, if possible.
Yep.
Okay, well, if we're going to do something for the CIP, it would have to be done in,
Next month or two.
yeah, right, okay.
Because
All right.
believe it or not, even though CIP feels like it just ended, it will start again in about 3 months.
All right,
So let's put it on the work
Yeah.
session for March.
right, okay. Okay, so Tavis, March?
For CIP?
Happy discussion.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Okay.
Well,
all
there,
right.
look at that. We addressed the entire work plan. Be done by April.
Okay. All right, did anyone have any suggestions of things that they'd like to see on the work program? Okay, well, I'll send the master plan off to you. Take a look at it. If you think there's something that sticks out, we'll discuss it at the next meeting, okay? All right.
One thing, and I don't think it's on the discussion items, but I think that the memo from Dave Ford about our municipal water system and sewer capacities is very important. And I happened to be at the Warren article where Dave was talking about the fact that there's going to be a lot of new piping put in to try to prevent a whole lot of wasted water that just escapes. But I think that it is a real issue that we have. One of the master plan suggestions was to protect, as in through easement or other ways, the watershed for our water source. But also we need to realize that it seems to be a finite resource, and DES has suggested that we may have some troubles with it, that we don't have enough water. And if we waste it, then we run into trouble. We also have limited sewer or septic capacity in our spray fields and other places. So, you know, this is something that this memorandum, I think, really does impact how we develop. And there is the large issue that we'd like to develop. We'd like to have lots of development, but it may not be possible based on our infrastructure. So it's something that I think we really need to pay attention to.
Okay.
I'd like to comment on that. The write-up that Dave Ford gave us had a sentence at the bottom of the page. It's not on this page, but it said, "I have no information to believe that anything is in the works to expand the sewer system." That was at the bottom of that letter. So that kind of raised some alarms with me, thinking that our Public Works Director is telling us that he knows of no information to grow our sewer system in our town. And I think if that's the case, we need to step up and give him some information to start working on, because if our town's going to grow, we need to start thinking about that. Those kind of,
At the same time, it is a chicken and the egg issue. In that we cannot have an increase in our sewer system if we don't have an increase in our water supply system. And so therefore, it is the water supply which is literally limiting what is needed in the septic world. So I would suggest that maybe we need to look at the water supply before we need to look at increased septic. And if you look at the numbers of gallons per day, you know, it's about the same. So.
Well, one of the interesting comments that Dave mentioned today was that, you know, we really don't know. We know the numbers. We know what we're permitted to treat, and we know what the water usage is. But what if all of a sudden everyone that uses their home seasonally used it year round? Is there enough water? ? So he's looking at doing another study. I asked him today, or I let him know today, that this memo was on for planning board discussion, asked if he wanted to speak to it. He said tonight didn't work, but I think before the board goes down any particular rabbit hole, it might be helpful to ask that he make a presentation at a later work session so that, which is it? Is it the water? Is it the sewer? How does it work? One of the things he has said to me, and I keep asking questions about, if somebody came in and were willing to invest in sewer for their project, could we increase the sewer capacity? He said, yes, the town may be able to make improvements for increased sewer capacity, but someone has to pay for it. So what I'm going to do is say the word again, impact fees. That's in other places, that's where impact fees come in, where the general taxpayer does not have to pay for the increase. Everyone that's been paying taxes for X number of years has already invested in the treatment plant and the infrastructure that's there. If you're going to tax that system, pardon the pun, you pay an impact fee to pay that upcharge. So we don't put 40-inch pressure sewer lines all the way out and wait for people to come use it, but when somebody comes in and needs it or is able to connect to it, they pay for that added cost themselves, which may include the additional permitting, et cetera. It also has to be balanced out on the water side. Is there water for it? But that's something that applicants can pay for when they come in. Should there be, I'll just say Harriman Hill size project comes in. I had represented to the board before that I'd had a discussion with Dave Ford, and he said there's X number of thousands of gallons left of capacity. But he didn't finish that thought. The back half of that sentence is, but we've already allocated it. So while we're not currently using it, we've already anticipated flow from the existing parts of town that max us out at our system. So I said, well, at some point, when you hear me say the word density, you have to throw something over the wall and remind me that we need a conversation, because the planning board has already started looking at increasing density potentially in the downtown, perhaps Bay Street, perhaps Wolfeboro Falls districts. And that conversation really needs to be coordinated with the infrastructure.
I submit that conversation needed to be coordinated long time ago.
Agreed.
I'm just kind of surprised that no one is lighting their torches and gathering their pitchforks and marching on downstairs with me at the head, wondering, what's going on here. When did you know, and what did you know, and when did you know it? At the deliberative session last year, Dave Ford testified that there were 340,000 gallons of capacity for the RIB. It's the same figure in this memo here. Between then and now, various developments have gone in, nothing very large, luckily, but nonetheless, and there has been no notice, no noise made at all about we're getting close to the limit. This is the first time I ever knew that we had 40,000 gallons a day capacity left over out of the 340 was when I saw this memo. It seems to me that that's the sort of number, it's the sort of advisory that this board should have been given a long time earlier than this.
Well, politics aside, this memo came out right around the time that there was a scheduled ZBA public hearing for density.
Understood.
Of which there was a personal preference that that project not occur, and then this memo popped up.
But this is a matter...
So there's an imbalance between when the information comes out and what purpose it serves to share the information.
This is not political, Tavis, and I don't want anyone hearing me or in this room tonight to think that this is a political jab at anybody. This is, to me, a failure in planning. Basically a failure in planning. We've known that the RIB is not up to the capacity that we were told it would be originally. Not anyone's fault but the engineers, apparently. That's my personal opinion. But we've known we've had 340,000 gallon capacity. We've known that we're creeping up to that limit. I will take responsibility and say it never occurred to me to say, by the way, how much more have we got left over? But then I'm just a volunteer planning board member. I'm not a professional guy working in town. I'm not a member of the Board of Selectmen. I'm not a town manager. But I really feel like I really was shocked by this. And then to hear Dave, when he testified before the Board of Selectmen last week, that he was recommending, he didn't say it very strongly, and the Board of Selectmen said absolutely nothing in return, a moratorium on sewer and water hookups. I mean, the fact that the Board of Selectmen said nothing to that was startling to me, because I remember the enormous catastrophic noise that was raised when the state put a moratorium on us some years back. Yet here's your DPW saying, I recommend a moratorium, and the 5 selectmen sit there like lumps on a log, said nothing. And here we have a project, and I'm going to end my rant soon. I beg everybody's patience a little bit longer. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Then to have this memo come out at a time when there is a project being presented to ZBA, timing is a little bit odd. And there's another project in the wings. It's a little bit late to be told as a planning board that no matter how well a project jumps over all the hurdles and goes through all the hoops, passes all your zoning regs, you really shouldn't do it because you haven't got the sewer and water capacity. Just hamstrings this board, and it should not have gotten this far. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to suggest that the proposed issue which brought this memo out was not just one house, not just 2 houses, it was a whole bunch of living spaces. And so therefore, instead of, an incremental change, this was a macroscopic change. And so therefore, that's the problem. I would also suggest that the town is working on that particular issue with a warrant article which is looking at redoing a whole lot of piping for the town. And some of those areas are going to change how we can deal with it. And it may end up being that if all those changes are as effective as proposed, this may not be as much of a problem. At the same time, there's a difference between the water lost and the water that you can process as sewage. And so therefore, now more water may be coming back to sewage because more people are there. So this is this was not just a one house and not just 2 houses. This was a project where there were going to be many houses or many new people living in town.
Yeah, but remember, the warrant article that's looking at replacing pipes is because the road's going to be torn up anyway.
Correct.
So one of the questions is if we've known that all the water lines under South Main are bad, why hasn't there been a capital reserve fund for the past 25 years, even if it was $5,000 a year, saying we know we have 100-plus-year-old clay pipes under the road. At some point, something's going to break. I mean, there have been 6 water failures this fall, winter.
In 1986, somebody, I believe it was 86, suggested that the town pay $12 million to build its own sewage treatment plant. And we as frugal Yankees voted it down because $12 million was an awful lot of money. Don't we wish we had built it then?
Got to keep in mind, too, the sewage treatment plant is completely different than the disposal system. The plant we have will handle more than the 600,000 gallons per day that we have and can be modified to handle more than that. Our pump stations we're looking at to replace on Laner Street and Mill Street are going to be done next year, planning out for future growth so they handle the flows. As you all know, we had a problem at that RIB site. We got the judgment on that, got it replaced. Just been back in operation for 2 months now. We have it up to around, like Dave reported to us, about 240 or 250,000 gallons per day we're putting into it. We're increasing it slowly to make sure that it's working properly. One of the big items that he mentioned there that you didn't mention, Mike, was that I&I infiltration into the sewer system has been a huge number for us in this whole system here. We got away from that probably 2 or 3 years ago. I was putting a lot of money into that. We're putting money into other capital projects. It is getting not reimposed, but it's being, done again starting this coming year. Huge inflows in that system. We'd probably be able to gain, he said he'd gain another 44,000 gallons per day of capacity on top of the 40,000 that we have now, which is double what we have for availability in the sewer system. In his report to us the other night, we took away from it, he was much more concerned about the growth with our sewer system than the water system. He feels we have plenty of room in the water system. With the old pipes we have and the program he's proposing to replace the 100-year-old pipes going up North Main Street and in that area there, with the amount of water we're losing in there, we'd probably be able to gain, I think in his paper here he had, there was a huge 80,000 gallons per day he'd be able to gain in the water there. And speaking of the moratorium thing, he talked about the old moratorium that we had back in '08 when this whole system went down. At that time, let's see, 30%. In 2008, let's see, they lifted the moratorium in 2008 on the water system here, because at the time, our water demand was 660,000 gallons per day, and with the leak detection and the effort they put into that, by 2015, we reduced it to 400,000 per day. Then with our 30% growth in 3 years, it's back up to 520,000. He feels we can bring that down another 80,000 with our leak detection and stuff, which he's applied for grants, and we're going to, go into that too and stuff. So to say that we're not being proactive in that, I think is wrong. Being very proactive on that, it's on our radar. It's being addressed. We obviously had to deal with the RIB site first to get that up and running so we could handle our wastewater that we have. And, I think they're doing a good job with that myself. So just wanted to kind of say that. There's probably a couple other things in there that I want to talk about I can't think of right now, but so that's kind of my comments on that.
Brad?
Okay, thanks.
The figures that are there for the wastewater plant, do those figures include everybody's septic tanks that get pumped, that get dumped there?
Yes.
Not just me on the sewer line that flushes.
Right.
But it includes all the trucks.
I'm sure they have a figure for that in there. They track all that.
Yeah, the trucks have to say, I got this much from these addresses and it was put here.
Because I know a lot of people don't understand that poopy water goes somewhere. And if you make it in Wolfeboro, it has to go to Wolfeboro.
Another thing I just thought of too, on kind of going one of Peter's comments was, you get a picture too, the water system, the sewer system. The water system is much larger as far as the number of people that it reaches out to. I think there's 2,500 customers on the water system, and I believe there's only like around 1,500 on the sewer system. Water system goes all the way up to, basically up to Libby Museum, goes down to the Alton, almost to the Alton Town line, goes out Center Street to, the Nick and all the downtown area, obviously. Whereas the sewer system only goes up probably as far as Lakeview Cemetery. So everybody, so it's a much smaller catch on the amount of water that goes out compared to the amount of water that goes into the sewer, wastewater treatment. So a lot of that goes back into their own individual septic systems and a lot of the developments and the outlying roads. So,
Well, according to what Dave's memo says, we have a hole in the ground into which we can pour X number of gallons per day by the state. And we're getting real close to that number now. We have water source from which we draw our drinking water. State gives us a limit on how much we can take out without finding another source, and we're real close to that limit now, too. And we're doing I&I, and we're doing sewer pumping station hookup repairs and replacements and all that. But those holes in the ground still can't take more than 340,000 gallons of sewage and pump out whatever it is, 400,000 gallons of water per day, I presume it is. What should the planning board's stance be on potential applications for large-scale projects, which will be pumping sewage and extracting water? And two, for when we come to redesign our multifamily, affordable, elderly workforce housing regulations when it comes to density? What do we do? Do we wait for Dave's reports to come in to tell us that we don't have only 40, we may have 65,000 or 80,000 gallons? We have maybe a couple of years to go. Can we take an assurance, assuming it passes all the regs, approve a project, for sake of argument, 60 families, only to find in 7 years' time that they can't accommodate the outflow and inflow from those units because we've hit maximum elsewhere in the town? And then what do we do? I mean, what was the advice to the planning board regarding density and regarding big projects?
I don't think you're going to hit capacity in town without the board knowing it, because there would have to be a project being presented to develop that kind of capacity. A single-family home here and there being added into the system isn't going to raise it
Agreed.
by that much.
But we won't even see that. That's not.
We wouldn't even see that. That's what you're going to see, obviously, is something like this coming through, with the workforce housing projects,
Yeah.
something like that, which you would have in front of you, so you would know that, okay, this project here is looking at, putting, 20,000 gallons per day into the system. Okay, so now we know what our parameters are going to be, what we have for capacities, and at some point, it's going to say, this project here is not going to be guaranteed access to the municipal sewer system, if it gets to that point.
And to that point, I think when Matt was here before Tavis wasn't here, but Matt testified to us that his report was that Dave Ford told him we had 1,500 hookups capacity. And at that time, I think it was based on single-family lots that were out there that he's already allocated. Is that how you would interpret that, Tavis?
I think the board or a subset of the board needs to come up with a way to get the right answers from Dave Ford. Because I don't know if we're looking at thousands of gallons per day or number of hookups, or, for example, how does a congregate care nursing facility compare to 60 apartments?
Yeah.
Or 60 three-bedroom units? Or I don't know if you'd run into this in Wolfeboro. I'm just trying to think of all the lot sizes that are out there, but if somebody came in and said, I want to turn this single family into 4 units, and it's on water and sewer, what happens? I know what we have to charge them at the building permit phase, and they have to pay that connection. But is there capacity for that? Because in the case of that, it may or may not need to come to the planning board. It may or may not be known what that is at the TRC level. So the board really doesn't have that feedback coming in. So I think the question is, I don't know. I don't know how to answer your question right now.
That goes
But
to
I think
the
the
point.
board needs to get, I mean, the memo was helpful, but the memo doesn't say, what does this mean at the project level? So we need to come up with a way to say, with the planning board received this application, can we plumb it? Not MMET, but UMB it.
That's sort of the value of TRC.
Correct.
Yeah.
But in this case,
But TRC doesn't get that data. For one thing,
Yeah,
your DPW
right.
doesn't sit on TRC anymore.
I know, that's
Which is
what
a
I just
problem.
said.
No, but my
Well,
point,
and
my
I think
point,
that's
Either
why I
way
go
we
back
look
to
at
the.
it, hookups or gallons per day, I don't see that we have a ton of wiggle room.
I took this memo almost at face value and said the planning board needs to hold on the density discussion. Because it appears that whatever capacity is currently there is already spoken for.
That's how it seems to me
Yeah.
as well. And remember, we have recently approved a project which would have made a significant impact, which will make a significant impact, without this information in front of us. Would it have changed the decision? I don't know.
So what Tavis is saying is spoken for. Somebody's already paying taxes on their property that may want to develop that lot later on. So they're paying the taxes and supporting the system, but maybe later on, they may not get to develop it.
You mean
Well,
for a single family?
Yes.
Well, I think the build-out included all the single family.
I think the
I think.
build-out that the most recent report, which is now 15 years old, looked at was, here's all the parcels that are at 6 units per acre, here's all the parcels that are 4 units per acre, and down the line. That is the capacity that exists. Ergo, all of those lots are already accounted for. But when somebody comes in hypothetically and says, it's zoned for 24, I would like 70, the planning board has no hard information to go back and say, you can have site plan approval, but it may not be able to happen. So, and how this raises its head is Dave was at TRC for that project. Majority of this discussion had nothing to do with water and sewer, but perhaps what the land be better used for. And then this memo showed up when public opposition turned to not wanting to support a particular project. That's why I referenced quasi-political timing of things. To be glass half full or fuller, I think that project coming in was the time that the alarm bell had to go off and say, wait a minute, we'd never accounted for this. So somebody has to make very clear that our system is not set up to do this. Our system is not set up for anything beyond what the existing regulations say. So I got very non-project specific at that point and said, Kathy, Mike, board, I don't think density is up for discussion yet until we have some more answers on this.
So I would suggest that right now we're talking about hypotheticals. We don't have enough data, and so I think we just need to move on this at a later date. And I think we're sort of spinning our wheels at the moment. But yes, it's an important issue.
Dave has talked about doing a new study. I don't know if that is in process, if an engineer has been contacted, contracted, funds allocated for, et cetera. So I don't know if
Mentioning
it's.
the memo without any time frame in there, and as far as spinning our wheels are concerned, the problem is we're here now because we span our wheels for a long time.
Correct, and we need
Let's
to,
not spin our wheels anymore.
yeah, and so we need to get appropriate data so that we can make a good decision.
Can you suggest from whom we get that data?
From Dave, from engineers, from whoever,
Okay.
but if we're going to make a change in the way that we deal with density in the town of Wolfeboro and how many lots or how many people can live in a given area, we need to know how it's going to affect our infrastructure.
Correct.
And infrastructure is an issue.
Okay, and those are all things that will come up when we talk about
Correct.
density. And so I'm assuming that that's going to come up when we talk about updating all of these multifamily and workforce and
Maybe that should be-
inclusionary.
That's one of the reasons the rewrite of the inclusionary has been soft-pedaled a bit right now.
Right.
Maybe this problem should be one of the first things we address on the CIP this year. One of the first recommendations the planning board makes. Let's get this long-term problem solved, start putting some money into a capital reserve fund
Right.
of a substantial nature, because we're going to be looking at a
Well,
big-ticket item down the line.
And one of the other things, I know I keep saying this, but it really can work this way. If impact fees get revamped, there are ways that when a project comes in, if let's just say everything else works, but the water and sewer utilities are a question mark, there is a way to do an evaluation to find out what the expense is to upgrade the system to serve that additional. So the planning board might have the ability to say, "Yep, we don't have a problem increasing the density in this area."
That only works for a functioning system, Tavis, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that because there's already money being set aside to make the system more functional. So if we can
The
address,
hole in the ground can only take X number of gallons.
right, we might need another hole, is what I'm saying. If somebody really wants that size project, they might fund the hole. Got quiet.
Okay, time to move on?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Okay, next item on the agenda is public comment.
Okay. 74 Moose Point Road. Along with Abigail Adams, who was here earlier in the evening, I was the Wolfeboro Waters Committee representative to the working group that worked on the stormwater regulations that you have in your packet. The first thing I want to say is I want to thank the Stormwater Subcommittee that worked on this for inviting us and the folks from Wolfeboro, Wentworth Watershed Association and the Conservation Commission to participate in the discussions that led to this project. It was a collaborative effort. The work you have there represents an awful lot of meetings, an awful lot of hours in meetings, and an awful lot of hours beyond meetings, doing research and working to put these things together. So we definitely appreciated the opportunity to work with that group. The other thing that's probably worth just mentioning as context, Tavis made reference to the fact that this is pretty heavy going, and it is to some extent. It's worth noting that the regulations the draft you were given is based pretty much on a model ordinance, stormwater regulations, published by the Southeast Watershed Alliance, which is a consortium of communities in the southeastern part of the state. I believe that the model ordinance was developed by the folks from UNH Stormwater Center, along with the local planning commission and other participants. The thing to remember about it is there's been discussion at times about the old ordinance not being user-friendly, and that sometimes comes up in these discussions. I think the thing for us to remember as we evaluate this is that these documents were written by professionals, for engineers, for environmental scientists, for contractors, all the folks who would be involved in developing and implementing a stormwater plan. And so there is no, I don't think, any expectation that we would ever hand these to a property owner and say, figure this out. And most certainly, I think the thing to remember, because it has come up from time to time, is these proposals do not apply to residential properties, right? This is for projects that come before you in site plan review and subdivision review. And there certainly is a need at some point to talk about residential properties and what sort of obligations we might have in terms of dealing with stormwater there. But I think the committee, those of us who developed what you have tonight, agree that this is not the document to do that, and so we took it out. And so that will be a discussion for another day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Okay, last item is a review of,
Business.
oh, sorry about that, there wasn't, yeah, okay, go ahead.
So we're going to add on to Mr. Massey's monologue there, and what I've had to do was educate myself, educate others with their comments. I learn And one of the biggest things that we don't know is what we don't know. So I've reached out to a company called ACO Systems, and ACO Systems designs stormwater reuse technologies, pervious infiltration and recharge technologies. And these technologies were developed in Europe. And the contact that I have, he tells me that the United States is about 10 years behind Europe in their stormwater technologies. And when I talked to him, I got the feeling that they have things that we don't know about yet. And I asked him, how important are they to our community? He says, you know, they're the life of your community. And one of the things he offered was to come talk to our community and give us a presentation. I said, well, how long would it be? He said, well, I could do an hour. And this is what he does. He goes to professional organizations. He gives that seminar. These technologies are reuse technologies and infiltration technologies that I know we haven't seen on our plans. One of the things that I want to do is I want the people to be out there to be able to know that just because you didn't meet the 10,000 square foot threshold, there still needs to be able to be an allowance so somebody can do a stormwater design without doing site development. And if they don't know what systems that they can use, they just don't know. They're not going to go to the engineers. So one of the things that I see is an opportunity for us to show everybody what the different technologies are, how far ahead they are, and people can reuse and make the water that they collect use on trees and shrub beds and planters, and we can keep those oils and those sediments from getting into the lake. There is a fine line out there, though, of how much water and recharge you want to go into the ground. Because as we know, animals and birds and so forth, they depend on that area where there's some water on the side of a road. Because that's where the deer and the animals are going to go. So there's a fine line balance of too much recharge, sending it all into the water, and not providing enough top water to get into the streams and those other areas that are also important. But I'd like the committee to understand that, you know, I've gone out there. I want us as a group to listen to the committee, and I'm opening this up for discussion. So I'd like to hear from the committee whether or not they'd like this gentleman, Peter Shaw, to come speak with us.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, why would it be an idea to have like a public information forum? Invite the public who are interested to come to a presentation put on by this guy, you MC it, an hour or so here or wherever, get the information out to the public, and then take this presentation and present that to the planning board for our guidance for when we come to look at stormwater regulations again in the future? Would that be something that would be worthwhile doing?
Well, can I add that the Wentworth Watershed Association for a number of years has had events where they have done this kind of education. They actually have a track record for getting a bunch of people here and to hear that kind of thing. In past years, they've had lots of landscapers showing up, and they've actually timed their meetings so that they could, the landscapers could be done with their jobs and then come have nice food on the way home.
Why don't you two guys get together?
So therefore, I think that this is something where you could partner with the Wentworth Watershed Association, who has a history of doing that, and you know, it may end up getting a larger audience, but so we should investigate that.
You mean have him come to that event? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, she has some knowledge of it, I think.
To partner up, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Julie Brown, Executive Director for the Wentworth Watershed Association. I came here tonight. We've been working collaboratively with the Stormwater Subcommittee to help develop these new regulations. And I wanted to comment on the this cool new technology you're talking about from Europe. I think that's an education piece, and that the whole point of the stormwater regulations is to provide the regulations that engineers can use to apply what resources they have to accomplish the tasks that the calculations require. So we can give them ideas, but that's their job through their education, is to find out how to do these things. And so, as John was mentioning, there's really cool technologies coming out of Europe. It's cool to introduce them to landscapers, but those don't go into regulations. The regulations say it's not prescriptive. They are supposed to say this is what you need to accomplish and how much you need to reduce and how much can come and go. There's that, and they can decide how to do that with the soils that are available on that site, what's happening on that site, how they can divert water, how much earth they're disturbing, et cetera. So I think that it's two separate conversations, and I would welcome we plan on having, COVID allowing, obviously, we were planning on having another landscapers session this year, as well as another water summit, and we have many presentations and all sorts of ideas, and we always welcome new technologies to be introduced, especially to, as Peter was saying, to the earth movers. If there's new technologies or new ideas or proposals like this particular group, we'd be more than happy to give them a place at the table or allow them to have a table at the event to talk about their technologies. But I see it as a different piece of information than the stormwater regulations that have been put in front of you by the experts, by CELT, and the reason, sorry, not CELT, I apologize, Southeast Land Trust, must be 9 o'clock at night, but by the Stormwater Group. And we started with those documents because that was the one that the group was told to work from. So that's why we worked from those particular regulations versus the one that you have from Washington, et cetera. We started with that one because it was the agreed upon research from our state that we started building the new ones. So that is why we started there, just to have a little bit of background information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Okay, anybody else? Okay, then we can now move on to the minutes.
Sure.
Okay. January 4th minutes,
7.
2022.
Oh, January 4th?
I have a lot of changes. Do we want to do them tonight, or do we want to hold this over?
Okay.
It's up to you. It's up to the board.
Let's just dive in. We're still here.
All right, fine. Page 1, first Mike Hodder. Mike Hodder stated number of waivers are longer than what he, or we, changed they to we, are used to seeing, but he had no difficulties with them. Turn the page. After the first line, insert application moved as complete by Hodder. All voted in the affirmative. After number 3, the bold paragraph, Mike Hodder moved to accept the application as complete. Bear with me. No, Mike Hodder moved to accept the application, period. John Thurston, second, all in favor, motion passed. Delete the rest of that paragraph.
Yeah, part of what you're seeing in here, Jennifer Braldy is the new person taking minutes, so what Terry did was show how she pre-formatted the motion, or pre-formatted the minutes. So essentially, that's why you have all the highlighting in there. So it was set up to say, look, first you write in what was written on the agenda as the agenda item, then you cut and paste the recommended conditions in from the planner review, and then most of that is dialogue on how it gets written. So yes, I agree. This goes before public hearing, et cetera, and comment all comes out.
Page 3, second paragraph. Mike Hodder praised Kirk Beswick and the Taylor community on being judiciously aware of of NHDES concerns for safe handling, delete the words "of the amount." And in the 4th paragraph, delete the word "comment." Motion was made to grant the architectural standards waiver and seconded. That should be motion made by me, seconded by I don't know whom.
John, I believe.
May have been John. Page 4. I seconded the motion. That's the third line. Going down, paragraph D, discussion continued, delete the last sentence. Next paragraph, Mike Hodder suggested changing, delete the word "in." Page 5, second paragraph, Mike Hodder made a motion in consideration of a work session on crafting a definition. Thank you.
Can you go back to the top of 5?
Top of 5, yes. Mike Hodder made a motion in consideration of a work session on crafting a definition of.
Works. Got it.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay,
Okay, so
You
what
wanna
was the
make
one,
them-
what was the one after that?
sorry.
I think that's all I had on 5.
Okay.
On that session, bit of minutes. Bear with me, and I'll tell you in a minute. That was all I had on.
Did we vote to
We did not.
have Doug Breskin on? Discussion items, there was moved and seconded, but did we approve? I think we all voted approval.
I think it was unanimous.
Good, thank you. Yes, that was an unanimous vote.
Apparently we did because he's here.
I didn't think there was any problem. It's like, but it might be.
I remember it happening.
Yeah, well,
Good.
Okay, everyone all set?
yep.
Somebody want to make a motion?
Move as amended.
Okay.
Approve as amended, I should say.
Second?
Second.
Okay. A motion has been made and seconded to accept this, the January 4th minutes as amended. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
Okay, all right, thank you, folks. Okay, somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
What about December 7 minutes?
Oh,
They're on the agenda.
yeah, but
I don't have them.
I don't have.
They were
them.
passed out at the last meeting.
Yeah, they were, but
What?
they were passed out at
They
the
were-
last meeting.
They were in the packet for the last meeting, but they were either odd or even only pages, so I passed out full copies at the last meeting. At this point, since everyone's scrambling, I would
Correct.
suggest you move it to the next meeting.
Move them to.
Oh, okay, all right, then, next meeting.
I'll second Kathy's motion.
Yeah. All
All
in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now can we make a motion to adjourn? Moved. Okay, second?
Seconded.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Thank you, folks.